The lobby of the Grand Lennox Hotel was buzzing. Velvet ropes lined the entrance, cameras flashed outside, and the smell of expensive cologne and floral arrangements lingered in the air. Tonight was the Vanguard Honors Gala, an exclusive event celebrating business leaders, celebrities, and social influencers who'd made headlines in the past year. Outside the main ballroom, sharply dressed guests checked in with their invitations, while security personnel in tailored suits managed the crowd. At 6:45 p.m., a man stepped into line near the back. He wasn't flashy. In fact, he barely looked like he belonged. Gray suit wrinkled at the elbows, shoes clean but worn, hair neatly combed back, thinning at the crown. He walked slowly, leaning slightly on a polished wooden cane. His name was Harold Green, 82 years old, and completely ignored by nearly everyone in the lobby. He waited patiently, hands clasped behind his back. The line moved forward. He approached the front desk. "Name, sir?" asked the check-in host, barely glancing up from her tablet. "Harold Green." She tapped rapidly, scrolling. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't see you on the list," she said. "Are you sure this is the right event?" He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. I received an invitation." She forced a polite smile. "Do you have your pass?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges. Inside was a formal invitation printed on embossed cardstock. She looked it over. "This is the correct date," she said, then frowned. "But this is a general invitation. Only VIP ticket holders are allowed in the ballroom at this hour." Harold tilted his head. "I was told I'd have access." "Unfortunately," she said, soft but firm. "You'll need to wait until general reception begins at 8:30. Before he could respond, a young man in a tuxedo stepped forward from the rope line. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, flashing a clipboard. The host looked relieved. "He's trying to enter without a proper credential." The man looked Harold over head to toe. His expression tightened. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "This section is reserved for guests with VIP wristbands." "I understand," Harold said calmly. "But I'm not here to take a seat. I was invited to present." The man raised an eyebrow. "Present what?" Harold reached into his coat pocket again. This time, he pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a medal. Not flashy, not shiny, but unmistakable. A Congressional Medal of Honor. The air shifted. The hostess's lips parted slightly. The man with the clipboard froze. "I'm not here for the spotlight," Harold said quietly. "I was asked to give a brief speech on courage. I was told there'd be someone here to escort me." People nearby turned their heads. Someone whispered, "Is that real?" A man in the corner began filming. "I received this in 1969, Harold continued. "I was 26 years old. I was told I might be one of the last to receive it in person from President Nixon. I kept it in a drawer for 40 years. Thought I'd never have a reason to take it out again." The young man lowered the clipboard, suddenly unsure of what to say. The hostess stepped back, clearly rattled. Then a woman approached, mid-50s, elegant, poised with a name tag, identifying her as Gala Chair Marla Jennings. She had just walked in and saw the velvet box open on the table. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, Mr. Green." Harold turned slowly. "Yes." She rushed forward and took his hand. "I've been trying to reach you. My assistant must have messed up the registration. You were meant to be escorted straight to the green room. I am so sorry." "It's all right," he said simply. "I've waited through worse." Marla turned to the staff. "Get him inside, right now." The crowd began murmuring louder. More cameras turned. People stepped aside as Harold was guided past the ropes, still holding the medal in his palm, like it weighed nothing and everything. The man who had questioned him stood silently, clipboard limp in his hand, because in that moment, it became painfully clear this wasn't just an old man in a wrinkled suit. This was a living piece of history, and they had almost left him standing in the cold. Inside the grand ballroom, lights sparkled from crystal chandeliers, violins played softly in the background, and guests clinked champagne flutes while laughing in clusters of designer suits and dresses. It was a scene of elegance, prestige, and performance. But when Harold Green entered, everything quieted just a little. He wasn't flashy. He didn't command attention. And yet something about the way he walked, slow, steady, centered, seemed to draw every eye in the room. Marla Jennings escorted him to a private corner near the stage, offering him a bottle of water and a reserved seat, with his nameplate finally placed properly where it should have been hours ago. "I can't apologize enough," she whispered. "You were supposed to be escorted through the back entrance. No lines, no waiting." Harold gave her a small smile. "It's all right. I've stood in harder lines." She paused, then asked softly, "Why didn't you say who you were right away?" He looked at the stage. "Because people usually don't listen until they see a medal." Marla didn't have a response. Across the room, whispers had started to ripple through the crowd. "Who is he? I heard he's a war hero. Medal of Honor. That's the highest one, right?" Some guests Googled his name. Others snapped subtle photos. But Harold wasn't paying attention. He was looking through his handwritten notes. On a folded sheet of paper, yellow-lined, creased down the middle. No speechwriter, no teleprompter, just his words. At 7:30, the lights dimmed, and the MC took the stage. Tonight the voice boomed. "We honor the courageous minds shaping our future. But before we look ahead, we pause to remember the past and those who laid the foundation for what courage truly means." The spotlight turned to Harold. A hush fell over the room. He rose slowly, adjusted his tie, and walked to the stage without assistance. No dramatic music, no preamble, just Harold in the silence. He stood behind the podium, squinting slightly at the bright lights. Then he unfolded his notes and began. "I was born in 1941, he said. Grew up in Missouri. Learned to work with my hands by 12. Got drafted by 22. Shipped overseas by 23. By 26, I was being handed a medal that still feels too heavy for the pocket I carry it in." He paused, letting the room breathe. "I didn't come here tonight for applause. I didn't come for recognition. I came to remind you of something." People leaned forward in their chairs. The word valor gets tossed around a lot these days, used in headlines, printed on posters. But let me tell you what it really looks like. He looked up from his notes. It looks like a 19-year-old boy named Ramirez, who took the front position in a convoy because he didn't want the new guy to be afraid. It looks like Sergeant Moore, who threw himself over a grenade and saved 6 men he'd never met before that morning. It looks like letters that never got mailed, like dog tags returned in silence. It looks like funerals with folded flags and eyes that never fully close again. The room was still. "I didn't win this medal," Harold said. "I carry it. For them. For the ones who didn't make it home. For the ones who did, but never really came back." He folded the paper again, looked out over the room. "And if you leave here tonight and remember my name, that's fine. But if you leave here tonight and remember theirs, that's what matters." Then without a word, he stepped back from the podium. No music played, but the crowd rose to its feet. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the slow, formal clap of society elites. It was real, raw, lasting. Some wiped their eyes. Others bowed their heads. But everyone for that brief moment understood that they weren't just at another gala. They had just witnessed something true. Harold walked off the stage as quietly as he had walked on, and somehow he left the room louder than it had ever been before. After Harold stepped down from the stage, something changed in the air. The crowd didn't scatter the way they usually did after speeches. No one rushed for the bar or checked their phones. They stayed rooted, watching as Harold made his way back to his seat with the same quiet dignity he had carried all evening. Marla Jennings was waiting for him with glassy eyes and a trembling smile. "That was beyond words," she said. "You reminded everyone here what this night was supposed to be about." Harold offered a polite nod, but said nothing. He wasn't one for basking in compliments. A younger man, in a sleek navy suit, stepped forward next someone Harold hadn't seen before. "Mr. Green," he said, holding out his hand. "My name's Darius Shaw. I work in veteran outreach with the city council." Harold shook his hand firmly. "That speech," Darius began, then stopped. "Would you ever consider sharing it with our youth program? We've got ROTC students who need to hear from someone like you. Someone real." Harold raised an eyebrow. Most of them wouldn't want to hear from someone who still uses a rotary phone. Darius chuckled. "I wouldn't be too sure. They're hungry for meaning, for stories that matter." Harold looked around the room. A group of well-dressed guests was still standing nearby, murmuring softly. Not just about the speech, but about him. A young woman, maybe mid-30s, approached nervously. "Sir, may I take a photo with you? My grandfather served and I want to remember this." Harold hesitated. He'd never been one for selfies, but her eyes reminded him of someone, a nurse he'd known in Saigon. Kind, brave, tired. "Sure," he said. The camera flashed. More guests came over respectfully, quietly asking to shake his hand or simply thank him. By the end of the evening, Harold had spoken more than he had in the past month combined. At one point, the man who had earlier denied him entry stood awkwardly nearby, waiting for a moment. Clipboard gone, shoulders slumped, Harold noticed. He stepped toward him. "I'm sorry," the man said. "I didn't recognize you. I should have." Harold raised a hand. "You don't owe me an apology." The man blinked. "I don't? You owe the kid you sized up in your mind," Harold replied. "Because one day he might be me, and he deserves better." The man nodded, shame written all over his face. "Yes, sir. Understood." Harold turned to leave. Marla caught up with him near the coat check. "Do you need a ride home?" she asked. He shook his head. "I've got my own wheels." Outside, the valet had already pulled up Harold's car, an old Buick, spotless, with a faded veteran's license plate and a cane resting across the passenger seat. He paused before getting in, looking back at the building behind him. The lights, the luxury, the noise. Then he looked down at the medal still tucked in his coat. He thought of Ramirez, of Moore, of the letters that were never mailed. And for just a second, his eyes welled up. He didn't speak. He just drove off into the night. Harold eased the Buick into his driveway well past midnight. The engine clicked in the cool air as he sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, replaying snippets of the evening. Applause, flashbulbs, that young man Darius asking him to speak to students. He was used to quiet nights, instant coffee, the evening news at low volume. Tonight felt like someone had opened a door he never meant to walk through again. Inside the house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Photographs lined a hallway table. His late wife Martha, laughing beneath an apple tree. Their daughter on graduation day. A platoon shot from 68, 23 men, crowded around a canvas jeep. Harold loosened his tie, placed the medal in its box, and set it on the mantel. He thought of leaving the tuxedo jacket on a chair, but forced himself to hang it properly. Martha used to tease him about draping clothes like abandoned flags. Old habits die harder when there's no one left to scold you. Sleep was fragile, broken by dreams of helicopter rotors and desert wind. He rose before dawn, brewed coffee strong enough to jolt the dead, and opened the local paper. Page 3 held a color photo, his wrinkled hand lifting the medal against a backdrop of chandeliers. The caption read, "Honored Hero, reminds gala guests of true valor." He snorted headlines, always polished reality until it didn't squeak. Still, he clipped the article and slid it beside Martha's picture. She would have teased him for acting surprised that people cared. At 10, his phone rang. Darius again, bright-voiced, despite the early hour. "Sir, I hope I'm not intruding. The ROTC instructor at Easton High heard about last night. The cadets are hosting a leadership assembly next Friday. They'd be honored if you could share your story." Harold traced a groove in the kitchen table. "Public speaking never was my trade." "I understand," Darius said, tone softening. "But I think they need someone who's lived the word courage, not just defined it." Harold promised to think about it. After he hung up, he opened the medal case once more. The ribbon's colors were still vivid blue-white stars, a green wreath. He remembered refusing to wear it for years, convinced it belonged to ghosts braver than him. Maybe he thought the kids should meet those ghosts. The following Tuesday, he drove to the nearby VA clinic for a regular checkup. The nurse Claire, a brisk woman with laugh lines, asked about the headline. Word traveled fast in small towns. She listened while checking his blood pressure, eyes shining. "These youngsters today, all screens, no stories. Go talk to them, Harold. Remind them none of this freedom stuff is free." He agreed, surprising them both. Friday came icy and bright. Harold polished his shoes, tucked the medal case into a battered leather satchel, and headed to Easton High. The receptionist, barely older than some students, escorted him down halls plastered with college pennants and motivational posters. Teens in camouflage ROTC uniforms shifted nervously as he entered the auditorium. The instructor, Master Sergeant Coleman, introduced him with a sincerity that felt heavier than the applause. Harold stepped to the podium. No spotlights, no chandeliers, just fluorescent bulbs and the faint smell of floor wax. He spoke simply about Ramirez covering the convoy, about sleepless nights when courage was nothing more than moving one foot after the other. He talked about coming home to a country divided, about burying friends whose names never made it past local news. He held the medal not as a badge, but as a question. What will you carry for one another? When he finished, silence hung like morning fog. Then cadets rose, not in ceremony but instinct. A girl in the front row, freckles across her nose, asked if he'd sign her notebook. Harold's signature shook, but his smile did not. Afterward, as the room emptied, Master Sergeant Coleman pulled him aside. "We run a mentorship program. Many of these kids don't have steady father figures. Would you consider coming by twice a month? Nothing formal, just conversations." Harold hesitated. Twice a month sounded like a promise, and promises were weighty things. But he thought of the lobby host, glancing past him. The clipboard man's downcast eyes, the faces of teens absorbing every word like precious rations. "I'll come," he said. "As long as they're willing to listen to a man who still types on a typewriter." Coleman grinned. "They'll listen." That evening, Harold parked at a scenic overlook on his way home. The sun was melting into orange ribbons over the valley. He rolled down the window, letting cold air cut through the warmth of the Buick's heater. For years he had believed his chapter was finished, ink-dried, pages closed. But stories, he realized, don't end when we think they do. They end when they stop being told. Back at the house, he found an envelope in the mailbox, thick paper gold, embossing the Vanguard Honors Foundation. Inside, a handwritten note from Marla. "Mr. Green, your words shifted the entire tone of our evening. We are launching a scholarship for veterans pursuing higher education, all in your honor. We'd be privileged if you would serve as its namesake and advisor." He read it twice, hands steady. Then he walked to the mantel, opened the medal box, and set the foundation letter beside it. The medal's ribbons seemed to glow against the paper, two separate recognitions merging into one silent dialogue. Later, as he brewed tea, the phone rang again. This time, It was the young woman who had taken a photo with him at the gala. She introduced herself properly: Olivia Reynolds' junior partner at a tech firm, granddaughter of a World War II medic. She wanted to sponsor the scholarship match every donation. My granddad always said, "Heroes wear humility like armor." Last night, I finally understood what he meant. Harold thanked her, voice thick. When the call ended, he leaned against the counter, letting the steam from the kettle fog his glasses. He wiped them clear and looked around the tidy kitchen, every drawer labeled in Martha's handwriting. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt companionable, not empty. He poured tea, sat at the table, and opened a fresh page in a spiral notebook. At the top, he wrote a single sentence: "The line between forgotten and remembered is one act of seeing." He tapped the pen thoughtfully, then began drafting ideas for the mentorship sessions, listening circles, letter writing to deployed troops, history projects using first-hand accounts. Plans unfurled like maps he hadn't known were still tucked in his pocket. Night settled outside, but Harold kept writing, the scratch of pen on paper echoing softly through the house. Somewhere between lines, he felt something click into place. Not a closing, but an opening. He understood now that the metal in his pocket had never been a period. It was a comma linking yesterday's sacrifices to tomorrow's responsibility. And he wrinkled suit, and all was still part of the sentence. Weeks turned into months, and Harold Green found himself becoming someone he never expected to be. At 82, a regular part of other people's lives again. Every other Friday he arrived at Easton High, 15 minutes early, just like clockwork. He always wore a jacket and tie, not because he had to, but because he believed the kids deserved respect. He brought stories, old medals, photos, and something more important, his time. The ROTC cadets listened. At first, they were stiff, polite, but eventually they leaned forward when he spoke, asked questions, stayed after just to hear more. It wasn't about war stories. It was about the choices between fear and action, silence and truth, selfishness and sacrifice. He taught them what courage looked like when no one was watching. One day, a tall boy named Malik approached him after a session. "My uncle was in Afghanistan," Malik said. "Came home different, doesn't talk much. But I showed him your speech online. He watched it 3 times. Harold nodded slowly. "Tell him I said welcome home." The mentorship program grew. Other schools heard about it. Other veterans joined. Harold became not just a guest speaker, but the quiet thread tying generations together. The Vanguard Foundation Scholarship, launched in his name, began receiving donations from across the country. A video of his gala speech went viral, millions of views, thousands of comments from people who hadn't known his name but would never forget it now. And then one Sunday afternoon, he got a letter, typed, formal, from the White House. It invited him to Washington, D.C., to receive a National Civic Impact Award. Not for military service, he'd already been honored for that, but for his work in education and youth development, for using his story to give others permission to tell theirs. He sat in his armchair, the letter resting on his knees, and smiled to himself. "Martha," he whispered, "would you look at that?" He accepted the invitation. And in April, he boarded a flight for the first time in years, his cane at his side and his medal tucked in his coat. At the ceremony, they called him to the stage. The room stood for him, not out of obligation, but reverence. He spoke briefly, like always. "I didn't build anything new," he said. "I just dusted off the truth we all forget, that every generation owes something to the one before and the one after. My job wasn't to teach these young people how to be heroes, just to remind them they already have it in them." Afterward, a girl in the audience ran up and hugged him. She was crying. "Thank you," she said, "for making my grandpa feel proud to speak again." Harold held her gently. "That's the best award I've ever received." Back home, He kept living simply, still made his own breakfast, still wrote letters by hand. But now there was more laughter in his house, more knocks at the door, young people dropping by just to talk, to ask questions, to sit at the feet of someone who'd lived enough for 10 lifetimes. On the 1-year anniversary of that gala, the night he'd nearly been turned away, Marla Jennings invited him back. This time, there was no confusion at the door. He arrived to find his name printed in gold. On the program, guest of honor Harold Green. When he stepped into the ballroom, everyone stood. No one looked past him this time. He didn't bring the medal that night. He didn't need to, because the world had already seen what was in his heart, and that was more powerful than anything pinned to a jacket. As the evening ended and guests began to filter out, Marla approached and whispered, "You changed everything." Harold looked around, at the young volunteers helping elderly guests, at the new scholarship recipients in tailored suits, at a group of cadets beaming beside the punch bowl. "No," he said. "They did. I just reminded them how." He walked out into the night, cool air brushing across his face. And as he stepped into his Buick, the headlights catching the edges of a fading veteran's plate, he smiled. He hadn't been forgotten. He had simply waited for the world to remember.